Here is a crazy thought for you. The harder you wait for the perfect fishing conditions, the more you guarantee that you are going to miss the absolute best bite of the entire year. You have been told your whole life that cold water means a dead lake. You think that sitting at home, watching the Weather Channel, and waiting for the water to warm up is the smart play. But what if I told you that while you are sipping coffee in your warm living room, the biggest fish in your local lake are feeding more aggressively right now than they will in the middle of summer? In this video, we are going to completely shatter the biggest lie in fishing. I am going to show you exactly why the giants are biting in water so cold it hurts your hands, and how you can catch them before anyone else even takes their boat out of the garage. Tell me the truth in the comments right now. What is the exact water temperature you usually wait for before you finally go fishing? Because whatever number you just thought of, it is probably completely wrong. We all know where this habit comes from. It is the classic grandpa rule of fishing. Since the dawn of the sport, guys have been hanging around the bait shop saying you have to wait for the dogwood trees to bloom, or you have to wait until the water hits a magic number like 60 degrees. It makes perfect sense to us as humans because we absolutely hate being cold. We hate freezing rain, numb fingers, and icy boat ramps. So we naturally assume that if we are miserable, the fish must be totally dormant and miserable too. We do the exact same thing year after year. We wait for a beautiful, sunny, comfortable Saturday in late spring to make our first trip. And sure, we might catch a few small fish, but we completely miss the narrow magical window when the absolute monsters are feeding heavily. Understanding why we wait is the first step to breaking the habit and unlocking the most explosive fishing days you will ever experience. Let us paint a very familiar picture. It is a crisp morning. You are looking out the window, sipping your coffee, and looking at the frost on the grass. You check the fishing forums, and everybody is saying the same thing. The water is just too cold. They say the fish are shut down. They say you need to wait another few weeks until that water temperature climbs up into the upper 50s or 60s. So, you listen to them. You sit on the couch, watch some fishing shows on television, and tell yourself you will get the boat out next month when the weather is nice and comfortable. But here is the brutal truth that nobody wants to admit. While you are sitting in your warm living room waiting for the perfect conditions, the absolute best bite of the entire year is happening right now, out there in that freezing water. You think you are being smart by waiting, but you are actually letting the biggest, hungriest fish of the season completely pass you by. It is the ultimate trap that catches fishermen, not fish. We are conditioned to think that cold water means a dead lake. We equate our own physical comfort with the activity level of the fish beneath the surface. But fish do not care if you need to wear a heavy coat and a beanie. Their biological drives are pushing them to feed, and they are doing it while the boat ramps are completely empty. Have you ever wondered what actually tells a fish that it is time to start moving and feeding? Most guys out there will swear up and down that it is all about the thermometer. They stare at the electronics on their dash, waiting for that magical number to appear on the screen. But fish do not have a built-in thermometer that magically unlocks their jaw when the water hits 55 degrees. Their primary trigger is actually the length of the days. Photoperiod is the scientific term for it. As the days start getting noticeably longer in the late winter and very early spring, it flips a biological switch inside the fish. Nature is telling them that the spawning season is approaching, regardless of what the weather feels like on any given afternoon. This means that even if the water is still chilling at 45 degrees, the extended daylight is screaming at them to wake up and start preparing. They have a massive biological demand to put on weight before the stress of the spawn. They need calories, and they need them right now. So, while the water feels like ice to your hands, the fish are already snapping out of their winter patterns and entering the most aggressive feeding phase of their entire annual cycle. If you ignore the calendar and only watch the temperature gauge, you are missing the biological alarm clock that is ringing right under your boat. Let us talk about the true giants for a minute. If your goal is to break your personal record and catch a fish that will make your buddies jealous, this cold water period is your golden ticket. Here is a secret that the seasoned tournament pros know but rarely talk about. The biggest fish in the lake are always the very first ones to move shallow and start feeding. The massive females do not wait for the water to get comfortable like the smaller, younger fish do. They have the most eggs to develop, which means they need the most protein. They are the pioneers, pushing out of their deep wintering holes and moving up to the first drop-offs and staging areas. When you go out there while everyone else is still waiting for spring, you are specifically targeting the largest specimens in the entire body of water. The smaller fish are still sluggish and holding tight to the deep structure, meaning your bait is not getting intercepted by the little guys. You are effectively weeding out the small catches. Picture yourself making a long cast into the freezing wind, feeling that subtle tap, and setting the hook into a fish that feels like a cinder block. That is the magic of the pre-spawn cold water bite. You are hunting the alpha predators while the rest of the lake is essentially asleep. We really need to break down the myth of the magic temperature number. Since the dawn of modern fishing, guys have been passing down this unwritten rule that you absolutely must wait for the water to hit 60 degrees before the fishing gets good. Maybe it is 55 degrees in your area, or maybe it is something else, but every local marina has that one specific number that everyone treats like gospel. It is a comfortable lie we tell ourselves because we hate freezing our fingers off. But think about it logically. Do you really believe a fish is completely dormant at 54 degrees, but suddenly turns into a feeding machine at 55? Of course not. The reality is that the upward trend is far more important than the actual number. If the water has been sitting at 41 degrees for a month, and it suddenly creeps up to 44 degrees after a few sunny days, that 3-degree bump is a massive event in the underwater world. It is like ringing a dinner bell. The fish feel that subtle warming trend and they react to it violently. They do not care that the water is still objectively freezing to human touch. They just know it is warmer than it was yesterday. Stop waiting for a specific arbitrary number on your fish finder and start looking for those tiny incremental warming trends. So, where do you actually find these fish if they are awake but the water is still bitter cold? The biggest mistake people make when they finally decide to brave the cold is fishing the same exact spots they fish in the middle of May. They run straight to the shallow flats, the visible spawning beds, or the very back of the creeks. But the fish are not there yet. You need to understand the concept of staging areas. Think of a staging area like the waiting room at a doctor's office. The fish are moving out from the deep winter basins, heading toward the shallow spawning grounds, but they stop at the very first major piece of structure just outside the shallows. This could be a steep secondary point, a channel swing that brushes up against a flat, or an isolated rock pile sitting in 10 to 15 feet of water. Imagine sitting in your boat, staring at a map. You want to find the deep water, find the shallow spawning bay, and look at the exact path between the two. That is where they are setting up their ambush points. They sit in that slightly deeper, more stable water, and they wait for schools of baitfish to pass by. They do not want to exert too much energy swimming all over the place. They want to sit in one strategic spot where the food comes to them. When it comes to actually catching these cold water monsters, you have to completely rethink your lure selection. You cannot just tie on your favorite topwater plug or a fast-moving spinnerbait and expect them to chase it down. Their metabolism is still relatively slow, even though they are actively feeding. This is where the suspending jerkbait becomes the most lethal weapon in your tackle box. If you do not have one tied on during the early spring, you are making a massive mistake. A suspending jerkbait perfectly mimics a dying baitfish that is struggling in the cold water, but the absolute key to making this work is your cadence. Most guys fish a jerkbait way too fast. They twitch, pause for 1 second and repeat. In cold water that is practically moving at warp speed, you need to twitch it a couple of times to get it down to the right depth, and then you need to let it sit there. And I do not mean pause for 2 seconds. I mean let it sit completely motionless for 5, 10, or even 20 seconds. Picture this. You jerk the rod, take up the slack, and then you just stare at your line. It takes an incredible amount of mental discipline to do absolutely nothing. But that long pause is exactly when the biggest fish in the lake will swim up and inhale your bait. Let us talk about what that bite actually feels like, because it is probably going to surprise you. A lot of fishermen wait for that aggressive rod-jerking strike that practically pulls the handle out of your hands. They remember how the fish hit in the middle of summer and expect the same violence in the early spring. But in cold water, even a 10-pound fish is not going to waste unnecessary energy slamming your lure at top speed. The bite is incredibly subtle. It often feels like you just caught a wet plastic bag, or like your lure suddenly got heavy and mushy. You might be letting your bait pause, and when you go to move it again, it just feels like your line is stuck in the mud. There is no sharp tap, there is no aggressive pull, it is just heavy. If you are not paying close attention to your line, you will easily mistake the bite of a lifetime for a clump of dead weeds. You have to become hyper-aware of every single thing your bait is doing. Keep a slight bow in your line and watch it closely. If you see the line jump even a fraction of an inch, or if it slowly starts swimming to the side while your bait is supposed to be paused, you need to reel down and set the hook immediately. Never wait for them to yank the rod. If you do not want to throw a jerkbait, or if the conditions just are not right for it, your next best option is a heavy jig. But again, you have to fish it with a completely different mindset than you would in the warmer months. When the water is frigid, you want to maintain constant slow contact with the bottom. You are trying to imitate a slow-moving crawfish that is just barely creeping along the rocks. Most guys will cast a jig out, let it hit the bottom, and hop it aggressively back to the boat. That hopping motion is way too much action for a fish sitting in cold water. Instead, you want to slowly drag the jig. Picture yourself literally dragging a heavy rock across a smooth floor. You move your rod tip slowly from the 9 o'clock position to the 12 o'clock position, feeling every single pebble and contour on the bottom. Then you reel up the slack and do it again. It is a painstakingly slow process, and frankly, it can be pretty boring. But that slow, steady drag keeps the bait in the strike zone for a very long time. It gives the fish plenty of time to look at it, swim over, and decide it is an easy meal that will not require a high-speed chase. Slowing down is the absolute hardest thing for most fishermen to do, but it is mandatory here. Now we need to talk about microlocations and the power of the sun. When the water is cold everywhere, the fish are going to look for any tiny advantage they can find to warm up. This is why you need to become obsessed with rock banks. Large rocks, boulders, and riprap act like natural heaters in the water. They absorb the heat from the sun throughout the day and hold on to it, slowly radiating it back into the surrounding water. If you have a lake with a mix of mud banks, sandy beaches, and rocky shorelines, you need to ignore everything else and head straight for the rocks. Imagine pulling your boat up to a steep rocky bank that has been baking in the afternoon sun. The water right up against those rocks might be just 1 or 2 degrees warmer than the water 50 yards out in the middle of the lake. That tiny temperature difference is like a magnet for both bait fish and the giant predators chasing them. You want to position your boat parallel to that bank and work your lures right up against the stones. The fish will push the bait against those warm rocks and trap them there. It is a highly specific pattern, but once you figure it out, you can run from one rock bank to another and completely dominate the lake while everyone else is struggling. Speaking of the sun, you cannot just fish any rock bank. You need to pay attention to exactly how the sun hits the lake throughout the entire day. The most productive areas in the early season are almost always going to be the northern banks or the northwest shorelines. Why? Because the sun sits lower in the southern sky during the late winter and early spring. This means the northern banks are getting the most direct, intense sunlight for the longest period of time. It is a simple matter of geometry and physics, but so many fishermen completely ignore it. They will fish the shady southern side of the lake, freezing in the shadows, and wonder why they cannot get a single bite. You have to follow the sun like your life depends on it. Imagine looking at a map of your favorite lake. Draw a line right through the middle and cross out everything on the bottom half. Focus all of your energy on those northern-facing bays and pockets. They are protected from the cold northern winds, and they soak up every ounce of solar radiation available. The water in these specific pockets will warm up much faster than the rest of the main lake, creating the perfect environment for the fish to wake up and start feeding aggressively. Always fish the sunny side. This brings us to a major shift in how you should plan your fishing day. In the summer, we are all trained to get out of bed at 4 in the morning to catch the early dawn bite. We want to be on the water before the sun gets too high and the fish retreat to deep cover. But in the cold water pre-spawn period, the absolute opposite is true. Sleeping in is actually a valid fishing strategy. The morning hours are usually the coldest and least productive time of the entire day. The water has spent the entire night cooling down, and the fish are going to be extremely lethargic. Instead of torturing yourself in the freezing morning air, plan your trip around the afternoon window. the best bite is almost always going to happen between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That is when the sun has had hours to beat down on the water, warming those surface temperatures just a little bit. That is when those rocky banks have finally absorbed enough heat to make a difference. Picture yourself arriving at the lake just as everyone else is packing up to go home because they had a terrible morning. You launch the boat in the warm afternoon sun, hit those northern banks, and suddenly the fish are active. You have to change your schedule to match the water conditions. Do not underestimate the power of a warm breeze. Wind can be your best friend or your absolute worst enemy during the early season. A cold, biting wind from the north will push freezing surface water into the pockets and completely shut down the bite. It will make you miserable, and it will make the fish lock their jaws. But a warm, steady wind blowing from the south is a completely different story. A warm southern wind will literally push the slightly warmer surface water across the lake and stack it up against the northern shorelines. It creates a warm water current that acts like a dinner bell for every predator in the area. Imagine standing on the deck of your boat, feeling a warm breeze hitting your face. You look at the bank in front of you, and you can see the wind pushing the waves right into a rocky point. That is exactly where you want to cast your lure. The wind is pushing the bait fish right into that structure, and the warm water is making the big females aggressive. Always check the weather forecast for wind direction. If you see a couple of days with a steady south wind, you need to drop whatever you are doing and get to the lake immediately. That warm wind pushing into a northern bank is the recipe for the best day of the year. Let us be completely honest with ourselves for a second. The main reason most people wait for the water to warm up has nothing to do with the fish. It is entirely about our own personal comfort. We hate being cold. We hate having numb fingers, wearing heavy boots, and dealing with a runny nose while trying to tie a knot. We use the excuse that the fish are not biting to justify staying home where it is warm and cozy. We let our own psychology defeat us before we even back the trailer down the ramp. But you have to separate your physical comfort from the reality of the underwater environment. Just because you are miserable does not mean the fish are miserable. You have to train your brain to embrace the cold. Picture yourself out on the lake. Your hands are freezing, the wind is howling, and your buddies are all sitting at home watching sports. You have to remind yourself right then and there that you are exactly where you need to be. You are putting in the tough hours to catch the fish that everyone else is going to miss. Once you realize that the cold is just a temporary discomfort, and you start focusing purely on the mechanics of the catch, everything changes. Stop projecting your own desire for a warm sunny day onto the fish. If your lake has any kind of submerged vegetation, even if it is dead and brown from the winter, you need to master the lipless crankbait. A lipless crankbait is an absolute killer when the water is cold and the fish are holding near the bottom. They have a tight wobble and emit a ton of vibration that can wake up a sluggish fish. The technique is not about burning it back to the boat like you would in the fall. It is all about the yo-yo retrieve. You cast it out, let it sink all the way to the bottom, and then you rip it up a few feet by raising your rod tip. Then, you let it fall on a semi-slack line right back down into the grass. The strike almost always happens on the fall. Picture throwing that bait out, feeling it tick the tops of the dead grass, and sharply ripping it free. As it flutters back down, you suddenly feel a heavy weight, like you snagged a heavy branch. You sweep the rod and realize that branch is a giant pre-spawned female. The erratic action of ripping it out of the grass and letting it flutter perfectly triggers their instinct to strike a dying bait fish. It is a very active, engaging way to fish when everything else requires you to slow down to a crawl. Just make sure you are letting it drop. One of the biggest factors that people overlook in the early season is water clarity. During the winter, the water in many lakes becomes crystal clear because the algae has died off. When you combine cold water with crystal clear visibility, you have a very specific set of challenges. The fish can see your lure from a mile away, which means they have plenty of time to inspect it and find flaws. This is not the time to be using heavy braided line tied directly to your lure. You absolutely must use a long fluorocarbon leader. Fluorocarbon is virtually invisible underwater, which is critical when the fish are moving slowly and relying on their eyesight. Imagine a big fish trailing your jerkbait in perfectly clear water. She swims up close, stares at it while it is paused, and looks for any reason not to eat it. If she sees a thick, visible line attached to the nose of the bait, she is going to turn around and swim away. You need to downsize your line just a little bit and ensure your presentation is absolutely flawless. Do not let bright, visible lines ruin your chances when the water is clear and cold. Take the time to tie a proper leader knot and give yourself the stealth advantage you need to fool these highly pressured fish. There is one specific weather event that you need to be watching out for like a hawk. It is the absolute holy grail of early spring fishing. I am talking about the very first warm rain of the season. After months of freezing temperatures and cold runoff, a massive storm system rolling in with warm rain can completely blow the lake wide open. That warm rain hits the surrounding land, flows into the creeks, and washes directly into the back of the bays. It carries warmer water, oxygen, and a ton of nutrients right into the shallow zones. It stains the water just enough to give the fish some cover, and it raises the temperature rapidly in very specific areas. Picture yourself standing on the bank where a feeder creek is dumping into the main lake after a heavy spring rain. The water there is slightly muddy, and it is a few degrees warmer than the rest of the lake. That is a massive dinner bell. The bait fish will flock to that warmer, nutrient-rich water, and the biggest predators will follow right behind them. If you see a warm rain in the forecast, you need to call in sick to work, put on your rain gear, and get out there. Fishing right in the middle of that warm runoff is the most explosive secret in the cold water playbook. Let us talk about one of the greatest hidden benefits of chasing this cold water bite. You are going to have the entire lake completely to yourself. Think about what a typical Saturday looks like in the middle of May. The boat ramps are packed, jet skis are running over your spots, and every good point on the lake has 3 boats fighting over it. The pressure is immense, and the fish know it. Now compare that to a Tuesday morning in late February or early March. You pull up to the ramp and yours is the only truck in the parking lot. The water is perfectly still. There is no noise, no wake, and absolutely no competition. The fish are completely unpressured. They have not seen a lure in months. This means they are far more likely to react aggressively to your presentation because they are not on high alert. Picture backing your boat down an empty ramp, knowing that you can fish any spot on the entire lake without having to beat someone else there. You can take your time, break down the water methodically, and truly hunt the fish. This lack of pressure is a massive factor in why the biggest fish are caught during this window. You are fishing for relaxed giants in complete solitude. It is a peaceful, almost magical experience. You can have the right lure, the right boat, and the right attitude, but if you do not know where the bait fish are, you are fishing in a barren wasteland. In cold water, the predators are not going to roam aimlessly looking for a meal. They are going to position themselves as close to the bulk of the bait fish as possible. During this early period, the bait fish are usually holding out in deep water, suspended over channels, or sitting on the bottom in the basins. As the days get longer, those massive schools of bait will start migrating toward the shallow bays to spawn. Your job is to intercept that migration. You need to use your electronics or a simple topographic map to find the highways that the bait fish are using. Picture a deep river channel swinging in close to a shallow flat. That channel is the highway. The bait fish will use that deep water for safety and slowly move up onto the flat as the conditions improve. The big bass and walleye will sit right on the edge of that channel, waiting in ambush. If you are casting into the shallows, but all the bait is still suspended in 40 feet of water out in the middle, you are wasting your time. Find the food, and the predators will absolutely be right there with them. We need to address the mental aspect of fishing in these conditions, because it is the hardest part to master. You are not going to catch 50 fish in a day. You are not going to have non-stop action from the moment you launch the boat. This type of fishing requires a monumental amount of patience and confidence. You might go 3 hours without a single bite. You might cast a jerkbait 500 times and stare at the paws until your eyes blur. Your brain will start playing tricks on you, whispering that the fish are not here, that the water is too cold, and that you should just pack it up and go home. You have to silence that voice. Picture yourself making your 1000th cast of the day. Your hands are numb, your back is aching, and you are starting to doubt your strategy. But you stick with it. You pause the bait. You wait. And then, suddenly, the line tightens. The rod bows over, and the fight is on. That is the reward for patience. You have to understand that in cold water, you are fishing for moments, not numbers. You are waiting for those brief feeding windows to open up. If you give up after 2 hours because you did not get a bite, you are walking away right before the magic happens. Stay focused and trust the process. So, it is time to make a decision. Are you going to be the fisherman who repeats the same old mistakes year after year? Are you going to sit by the window, watching the thermometer, waiting for the dogwood trees to bloom, or the magic temperature number to appear on a screen? Or are you going to break the cycle? You now have the knowledge to go out there and dominate while everyone else is watching fishing shows on television. You know that the big fish are moving right now. You know how to find the staging areas. You know how to fish a jerkbait on a painfully long pause. And you know how to hunt for the warmest water on the northern rocks. Imagine the look on your buddies' faces when you show them a picture of an absolute monster you caught while they were complaining about the frost on their windshields. The biggest mistake in fishing is letting old myths dictate your season. Do not wait for the perfect conditions, because perfect conditions do not breed giant fish. Get your gear ready, bundle up in your warmest clothes, and go claim the best bite of the year. It is out there waiting for you right now, hidden beneath the freezing surface. Do not let another season pass you by because you were afraid of the cold water. The next time you look outside and think the water is too cold to fish, I want you to remember everything we just talked about. The biggest females in the lake are already moving. They are staging on the first drop-offs, waiting for you to drag a jig slowly across the bottom or pause a jerkbait right in front of their faces. Your physical comfort has absolutely nothing to do with their biological need to feed. The cold weather is actually your greatest advantage because it keeps the crowds away and leaves the giant, unpressured fish entirely for you. If you learned something new today and you are ready to break the old myths, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a like on the video and drop down into the comments to let me know your thoughts. Are you going to brave the cold water this season, or are you still going to wait for the warm spring days? Let us get a discussion going down below. Thank you so much for watching, keep your lines tight, and I will see you out on the water.